This week's US CQM forecast alert is real GDP versus real GDI. The biggest uncertainty in the CQM forecast for this quarter is the forecast for both import and export. In particular, the growth rate of imported goods in January and February was unusually large. CQM forecasted the growth rate of imported goods to be 12.6% in 2024 Q1. This has constrained economic growth on the expenditure side. For the first time in 5 quarters, the growth rate of real GDI exceeded real GDP in 2023 Q4. Although the statistical discrepancy decreased by about 100 billion from 2023 Q3 to Q4, the SD-GDP ratio is still high at 2.0% in 2023 Q4. As a result, the downward trend in the economy appeared to have bottomed out. There seemed to be no negative growth this quarter on both the expenditure and income sides. The growth rate of real domestic final sales is forecasted to be 1.85%, indicating that export and import are the reason for the low GDP growth rate this quarter. CQM forecast show inflation steadily rising. All inflation rates are now above 3%. It has become difficult for the Fed to cut the policy interest rate despite slowing economy. The SD in 2023 Q4 is 555 billion, which is almost the same size as Norway's GDP. As a percentage of GDP, it is around 2%, and SD cannot be ignored during the forecast period. CQM estimated and forecasted SD using ARIMA because SD shows strong serial correlation. As a result, the nominal GDP on the income side are calculated as nominal GDI plus forecasted SD, being different from nominal GDP on the expenditure side. Based on this, CQM uses an implicit deflator, price deflator, to calculate the economic growth rate from the income side. This graph shows the gap between the growth rate of real GDP and real GDI from 1990 Q1 to 2023 Q4. The average growth rate for this period is the same for both real GDP and real GDI at 2.56%. However, we can see that the growth rate of real GDP and real GDI in each quarter are quite different. The average absolute gap between the growth rate of real GDP and real GDI in each quarter is 1.7%. Therefore, relying on either real GDP or real GDI to judge the current or short-term economic situation increases the risk of making incorrect economic judgment. Based on this fact, in order to grasp the correct short-term economic growth rate, we should focus on GDO, which is the average of GDP and GDI. Conclusion from this week's US CQM forecast alert. The first, The average gap between the growth rate of real GDP and the real GDI for each quarter is 1.7% during 1990 Q1 to 2023 Q4. The second, relying only on GDP on the expenditure side to judge the current economic situation increases the risk of misjudging the economic situation. The third, when making short-term economic judgment, it is best to pay attention to GDO. The fourth, inflation has been steadily rising, with all inflation indicators now above 3%. The Fed will suffer at the same time from economic slowdown and rising inflation for some time. This slide contains additional information about this week's detailed CQM forecast and shows how to access the past US CQM forecast alert.